Welcome to 5 Minutes VHDL Podcast, the podcast where we talk about VHDL and hardware design. In this episode, we will see how to parameterize our entity. I mean, how to make parametric our entity. The typical example is counter. Assume that you have a counter, an entity that counts pulse or something like that. And our counter is implemented with a certain number of bits. For instance, counter with 8-bit, we can count from 0 to 255. But if we need to count, for instance, 1000, we need more bits. In this case, we have to write down another entity with a counter with, for instance, 10 bits. The counter is always the same, but we have to change the number of bits. We can make the same example for a shift register, for instance. A shift register of, 8-bit with depth of 5. If we need to change the depth or the width, we need to change some parameter inside our entity. So there is a way in VHDL to parameterize the entity. The same example, we can make the same example for a RAM or memory or something like that. In the Telegram channel, you can see an example with a RAM. We have two examples. For instance, in the left side of the picture, we have a RAM that has 32-bit data and 10 bits address, and the control output enable, read and write, and chip select. On the right side, we have the similar RAM, but in this case we have the data bus of 64 bits, the address bus of 12 bits. So the RAM is the model is always the same, but some parameter can change. In the left side, we have the access time for the address 30 nanosecond and the output enable time 35 nanosecond. And on the right side, 50 nanosecond of TAA and TOA 40 nanosecond. In this case, we don't need to write down two different models, but we can use generic to parameterize our entity. How we can use generic? In the entity definition, we can use the clause generic, where we put the value of parameter, in this example, data width, address width, and TAA and TOE. We can put the default value on the generic, for instance 64, 12, 50 and 14. And when we instantiate the component, we can map the value of the generic in the generic map clause. In fact, on the left side we can map 32 bits of data width, 20 bits of address width, TAA 30 nanosecond and TOE 35 nanosecond, and then map the port. On the right side, we don't map generic. What this means? When we don't map the generic, and the generic in the entity definition as a default value, the default values will be used in the instantiation of the component. So, if you want to design your entity with a particular generic value, you can use the default value in the generic definition inside the entity. And in this case, when you instantiate the component, you can avoid to map the generic. On the other hand, if you want to parameterize differently the component instantiation, you can map the generic clause as like the port map, is the generic map, and map the generic value. In this case, you can write down a parametric entity and you can define the value of the parameter when instantiate the component. Remember to join the Telegram channel, and in the episode note you can find all the reference to this episode. See you the next time, and ciao.